Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. For the America First, Second, and Third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, October 11th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on world events. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, managing the Truth Warp Drive, his hand hovering over that phone, ready to swoop on down as soon as you call on in with your comments and questions here. A reminder that next Tuesday, Jim Traficant will be our on-air guest talking about current events. And we're working on a couple of other guests here, but they haven't confirmed yet, so it's going to have to stay a secret for right now. Obviously, big news, at least here in the independent media. The trucks have begun to roll into Washington, D.C. We're getting pictures off the traffic cameras, getting updates from the field. So this thing is up and running. And, of course, the government and the corporate media are trying to whistle and look the other way and say, what trucks? What trucks? Last night, the official web page for the Ride for the Constitution went down. I have not found out what happened. I know there's some people out there in the independent media say, the government shut it down, the government shut it down, and maybe they did, or maybe they didn't. We don't actually know just yet. It could be that their internet service provider has a bandwidth cap on that account that was exceeded, but as of this morning, the domain for the Ride for the Constitution's website now points at their Facebook page, and all the updates and everything are being presented over there. So you can follow that link now, and you will get the Facebook page, and there's all kinds of information coming out about what's going on. A lot of people still asking, will the government sabotage the truckers' Ride for the Constitution? Well, at the moment, they're certainly trying to pretend it's no big deal. Just like they're trying to pretend the World War II veterans was no big deal. The Vietnam veterans are marching into Washington, D.C. this weekend. That's no big deal. The bikers are in Washington, D.C. That's no big deal. People are on overpasses all across the country hanging out banners saying impeach the president, impeach the Congress, impeach the whole mess. That's no big deal. But it is turning out to be a major display by the American people. And I know the government isn't going to pay any attention. But the importance of getting out there this weekend is for we, the people of the United States of America, to send a message to the rest of the world. We're not part of all this craziness that's going on inside Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. We don't support it. We don't agree with it. We're doing our best to stop it so that future history will not collectively demonize all Americans as villains for the acts of the government, just as today's culture tends to demonize all Germans for the crimes of the Nazis. And they ignore those Germans who tried to stop the situation, like the Order of the White Rose. So we're getting a lot of coverage, certainly a lot of coverage from the overseas independent media. 21st Century Wire's out there calling this America's first diesel and chrome flash mob, which I think is putting an interesting spin on it. And again, this is all covered by the First Amendment. The right not only to freedom of speech, but read that entire First Amendment. The right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. And if the government doesn't want us assembling around Washington, D.C., they shouldn't be giving us grievances. Now, already we are getting stories that the Virginia police are pulling over the trucks and writing tickets for blocking traffic or impeding traffic. So they're out there trying to punish these people as hard as they can, any way that they can. And by the way, Washington, D.C. is not the only place these trucker strikes are taking place. Apparently over in Arizona, they have their own state Ride for the Constitution that is riding into Phoenix. So this is really nationwide. And remember, we were talking to Zeta on the phone yesterday. There are truckers that came all the way from Alaska to take part in this event. Hawaii may be the only state that doesn't actually have a truck in Washington, D.C. this weekend, which is a little hard because we're on an island and, you know, you drive a quarter mile, come up for air, drive a quarter mile, come up for air. It's a little impractical. Plus, of course, on October 12th, which is tomorrow, is the Global March Against Monsanto that is taking place everywhere to just continue to just declare to the world, we know these products are unsafe, They have not been adequately tested. Genetic engineering, playing with the code of life itself, is the most dangerous technology ever played with, and they're handling it very recklessly, complete disregard to its potential for major widespread disasters. And with all of this happening, what is the corporate media talking about? Well, to judge from Fox News, they're in total tabloid fluff mode. And I posted a story from Fox News website about the Glee tribute to actor Corey Monteith, who died of a drug overdose and left his fans in tears. And this was also on the Fox News channel. With all these protests going on and everything, this is what Fox News decided you, the American people, ought to be thinking about. And they just went on and on about how this TV show, Glee, had to deal with the loss of the character because the actor had died of a drug overdose, and how difficult it was to write the screenplay and film the episode. Okay, and don't get me wrong, I send my condolences to the family of Corey Monteith, but having worked in Hollywood for 30 years, death by drug overdose happens with alarming regularity. It's not really headline news, let alone how a fictional, made-up TV series he played a character in is having to write him out of the script. That's not news. News is what affects your life directly. Everything else is distraction and advertising. The news is the economic meltdown. The news is the shutdown. The news is 300 million Americans standing up in anger and saying, we've had it. We've hit our limit. That's the news. Anyway. Now, yesterday, and by the way, the stock market is up today. The plunge protection team is doing their traditional end-of-the-week massaging to get their happy ending for Friday night. And yesterday, the market shot up on rumors of a deal between Boehner and Obama for a short-term debt ceiling increase that would last for 6 weeks, supposedly to give them more time to hash out where spending cuts are going to happen, and to give the American people time to forget the real issue of defunding Obamacare. And as a result, the Dow soared, 300 points. Huzzah, huzzah, good times are here again if you're a Wall Street money junkie. Then, after the markets were closed, we get word from the White House that Obama rejected the deal. So we're basically back to where we were before, budget impasse. The government shut down, at least those parts of the government you like and want to have. All those other parts of the government that you don't approve of, like the war machine, money to Israel, bailouts for Wall Street, all that stuff is still going on. NSA is still spying on you. TSA is still grabbing your crotches. But the veterans are being harmed. The fragile portions of our society are being harmed. This government is now in a situation of spending 100% of its finances on war and bailing out Wall Street. And they're spending nothing on you, the American people, to punish you for not going along with condemning your children and grandchildren to more unpayable debt than we ourselves have been condemned to. And again, behind it all is that question. With the Constitution granting to the United States government the authority to create and issue an interest-free public currency, why for the last 100 years has that government borrowed the public currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? Which is why this nation and this government are so deeply in debt. It's a Ponzi scheme by design. This system creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, so the debt just grows over time and grows over time, and everybody says, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be, and your grandchildren will take care of the mess. Well, the mess is here today, here and now. We're going to take a break for some commercials here. When we come back, some more details about the shutdown and just how completely pointless the whole exercise has been. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you're probably aware, as part of this shutdown, the government has closed down the national parks, national monuments. They've taken the handles off the drinking fountains on various hiking trails. They've actually got police near Mount Rushmore so that people who are blocked from entering the official parking lot for the monument can't stop by the side of the road and look and photograph at the monument. They're actually spending more money to do that than they're in theory saving by not having this parking lot open. How much does it cost to leave a parking lot open? It's just sitting there. It doesn't use electricity. There's no running water. There's nothing. It's cement and paint. That's all it is. And they're shutting it off to teach you uppity Americans that you will agree to more debt. Now, a lot of states start invoking their 10th Amendment rights to say, we will open the parks ourselves. And we'll pay for it. Because it really doesn't actually cost all that much to have these things open. And at first the Obama administration says, you can't do that. We own those national parks. And then somebody reminded the Obama White House that no, in point of fact, you don't own those national parks. Those parks belong to we the people. You, the government, are hired to be the janitors to take care of these places. And if you don't want to do the job, that's fine. Feel free to resign. But you don't have a legal or moral authority to keep the American people out of the American people's property. So the Obama administration has now backed down and is saying that if states want to take over management of the national parks out of their own pocket, they can do that. I think it's a good start. And while we're at it, we, the people, will gladly use our own money to operate, well, Washington, D.C., because that also is the collective property of the American people. And so all we ask is that this permanent parasite class in the Capitol building in the White House just hitch a ride on one of those trucks heading out of town, and we would be happy to take over that city and decide for ourselves how to run the nation for our future posterity, not for the benefit of the bankers in Israel and the war machine. Now, getting back onto Obamacare, and it's almost funny to watch how the government and the corporate media are trying to deal with this absolute total disaster. $600 million in 3 years, and the system just does not work. Over the first week of operation, only 51,000 people in the entire country were able to actually complete an Obamacare application. Out of tens of millions of Americans in 36 states who tried to get on and couldn't get anywhere. 51,000 out of tens of millions? There is no way to spin that as some kind of a modicum of success. It's an absolute disaster. This story, of course, is being reported in the foreign press, not the American press. This was in the Daily Mail, who attempted to contact the White House for a comment on these abysmal numbers and basically got silence. Numbers so far. Here in Hawaii, nobody succeeded in signing up. The system absolutely was unable to connect that application process to the health care providers. Zip, zero, nada, nothing. Iowa succeeded 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just 5 in the entire state of Iowa. Maryland did better. They got 326. The goal for these 3 states is 7 million. So let's see, we've got 331 plus 0 in Hawaii. 331 out of 7 million. Now, the Obama administration has announced today that they will undertake to rebuild portions of this computer system to deal with these little tiny minor glitches. And Obama still, all new technology has little tiny glitches, you know, the Titanic hitting that iceberg, that was just a glitch. The Hindenburg exploding, that was a glitch. Challenger falling out of the sky, that was just a glitch. Meanwhile, over in New Jersey, the changeover to Obamacare has forced over 800,000 residents of New Jersey to change their insurance plan from what they have now to new plans that, ta-da, you knew this was coming, cost a lot more, have higher deductibles, and less actual benefits and payouts for medical care. This is a pure giveaway to the health insurance companies, generating trillions of dollars in pure profit. And the motive for the U.S. government is, it is estimated that with Obamacare up and running, it will bring an additional $200 billion in tax revenues into the federal government's coffers. And Obama needs that additional revenue to come in, because even if the Congress raises the debt ceiling, who's going to loan this government any more money? Unless the government can say, look here, we've got this new tax revenue stream that we can use to make the payments on all this new borrowing. That's why even as bad as this system is, they're still pushing forward, trying to say, do it, do it, do it, do it. They're out there flogging people. You will sign up for Obamacare. You will pay this higher money. You will give us your tax money. Or the terrorists will win. More fallout coming out of that revelation that Obamacare applicants were being forced to provide their credit scores, because it opens up what is very clearly a catch-22, in that if you don't have an adequate credit score to prove what a good little slave you are to those private central bankers, you can be denied insurance by the health care providers. And if you don't get insurance in Obamacare, the IRS comes after you with a fine. It's all about taking more money from you by a government that is broke and hopelessly in debt and lacks the decency to say, all right, we screwed up, we hereby resign. That Obamacare website cost more to put together than Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn all combined. Remember when it was first starting up and nobody could get in, and they said, oh, it's just insanely popular, and that's why it's all hanging up. Well, Google's insanely popular. But when you type in your search request, you don't get a message back saying, we'll get you your search results next February. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, Indiana is going to take Obamacare back to the Supreme Court. And they're going to basically argue that it was illegal and inappropriate for Chief Justice Roberts, who had opposed Obamacare, and then at the last second, somehow he just saw the light. He got the message, got the late-night phone call, did a 180, and sort of rewrote the law from the bench to declare it legal under the Commerce Act. And the Supreme Court is not allowed to do that. Only Congress writes the laws. And so Indiana is taking it back to the Supreme Court. So it's going to go on that. And even at this point, the corporate media is throwing their hands up and saying, we can't sell this anymore. And so we're starting to see all over the late-night TV that everybody's starting to come out with the Obamacare launch jokes. There's a very funny commercial linked to the pseudo-commercial linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com showing all these happy people who think they're covered under Obamacare, and it's hammering home the point. No, you aren't. Because just because you fill this thing out doesn't mean there's a health insurance company that actually knows you're out there. So it's turning into a major, major domestic policy disaster. And the reason it's going to be such a disaster is they were raising on a busted flush. The wise and prudent thing for this government to have done 2 weeks ago, when the programmers who wrote this system were out there screaming, this thing is not ready to go, would have been to go for the compromise offered by the House of Representatives to delay the implementation of Obamacare for a year while they get the bugs out. That would have been the wise and prudent thing to do. But because the Obama administration is just desperate for that $200 billion in tax revenues, or the IRS fines that will amount to who knows how many more billions of dollars, they said, you will do it now. I have to have it now. We can't wait a year. Which tells you just how fragile that federal government is and how close to the edge of collapse they have arrived. We're going to take a break for some commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you're probably already aware, Ben Bernanke is stepping down as chairman of the Federal Reserve, and they had the required ceremony at the White House while his successor, Yellen, is handed the baton for the Federal Reserve. And Ron Paul is already out there, and a lot of people agreeing with him, that this does not represent a change of policy for the Federal Reserve. They're going to go on issuing the public currency as a loan at interest because that's where their wealth comes from. And as far as their other policies like quantitative easing, they're trapped. They can't stop. Quantitative easing was supposed to be an emergency one-time only measure to save all these Wall Street financial firms from collapse from the explosion of the mortgage-backed security fraud back in 2008. And every time they talk about tapering down or cutting it off, the stock market tanks. And all these Wall Street firms that have been holding up the stock market by buying huge blocks of stock, they're now trapped. They have to go on doing exactly what they're doing, because to step off that narrow path is to accelerate disaster. And yet we know the end of that path is the edge of a cliff. So Ron Paul's right. They're not going to change anything that they're doing because they can't. And we all know what the ultimate outcome is going to be. Meanwhile, another little scandal about the Federal Reserve. Apparently the New York Federal Reserve has their own examiners who will look at various investment houses to basically keep an eye against the more obvious fraud that might harm the Federal Reserve. And apparently, under a Federal Reserve mandate, Goldman Sachs was supposed to have a company-wide policy to address conflicts of interest in how the deal makers handled clients to avoid issues of insider trading and other corruption. The Federal Reserve examiner concluded that Goldman Sachs really didn't have much in the way of safeguards against criminality, and the immediate result was that the New York Federal Reserve fired the examiner for daring to point out that Goldman Sachs seems to be playing very fast and loose with the rules. Because playing fast and loose with the rules is the only thing preserving the reputation and trustworthiness of the American banking industry. They're trapped. They're absolutely trapped. They have basically reached the point where this pyramid was going to collapse. They resorted to fraud and instantly created money and game playing to try and keep the system going just a little while longer while they cash their own portfolios out. There was that magazine article we posted, I think, about 6 months back, where they did a survey of Wall Street financial executives, and 25% of them openly admitted engaging in fraud. Said it was accepted behavior on Wall Street, and said without the fraud they would have gone out of business a long time ago. This is not a healthy economy. This is a complete sham. It's the illusion of a good economy. And the only illusion, of course, is on Wall Street, because everywhere else in this country, you don't need me to tell you this. Walk down your main street of your local town. Look at all the commercial vacancies. Look at all the hungry. Look at all the homeless. You don't have a good economy until the economy is good for everybody, not just the money junkies. And, of course, the money junkies are doing fabulously well, and they think that's the way it's supposed to be. But the storm clouds, they are a-gathering, apparently over in China, which came out of this Asia-Pacific Economic Conference looking like a star, and the U.S. was just totally sidelined. And China is now saying that they are having to take steps to deal with the U.S. problem. The U.S. and its dollar are now seen as a global problem, not a benefit, not a blessing, not an aid to international commerce and banking, which is how it was sold during Bretton Woods. The rest of the world sees our economy and the way it's being managed and our private central bank as a problem. That's the word they're using. One of their senior Chinese bankers was saying. So apparently, a couple of nations in Asia are already putting together what they're calling a safety net of approximately $6 trillion, which China certainly has because they're a manufacturing titan. They sell products and money comes in, and they have it to play with, as opposed to the United States, which games the system, has surrendered its manufacturing and destroyed its agricultural exports, and they don't. And they're basically, the Asian policymakers are setting up a $6 trillion safety net for the Forex, which means the foreign exchange markets, currency exchanges. Now, China is already delinking from the dollar. They've got treaties with 8 individual countries and now with the European Union for direct currency swaps from the yuan to their currencies without having to go through the dollar. So the dollar is already collapsing as the global trade and reserve banking currency. Fox News just wants you worrying about young Hollywood stars who die of drug overdoses. They don't want to talk about that. But the rest of the world sees what's coming, and they're making preparations. So I was looking the other night on TV where everybody was saying, well, the dollar can't collapse as the global currency. It'll bring the entire world down, you know. And no, because the rest of the world is already heading for the lifeboats. They're already delinking. They're dumping treasuries. Federal Reserve is buying up the treasuries with instantly created money. It's just not going to last much longer. Meanwhile, speaking of Europe, because they are also enslaved to a private central bank issuing their public currencies alone at interest, they're all drowning in debt, and the banks are faltering. And now the IMF has suggested that the Eurozone impose a 10% super tax on all savings accounts. Kind of negates the whole reason for having a savings account, doesn't it? The idea is you'd put your money into a savings account, and because of the interest being paid on your account, your money would increase. Well, now you put your money in a savings account, the interest you're being paid on the deposit doesn't even match the rate of inflation. So you're already losing real value and buying power just keeping your money in a regular savings account. And now the IMF is saying, well, we're just going to shave off 10% of all those savings accounts in a super tax. Got to get your money out of those banks. Get it at home under your control. Put some of it into physical silver and gold, junk silver especially for bartering purposes. These banks clearly, I mean, just wake up and look at it. These banks are not operating in the best interests of their customers or their nations or the population of those nations. These banks are wholly about grabbing more wealth to themselves to satisfy this little Ponzi scheme mechanism and try and pretend to themselves that it is not ultimately going to collapse. We're going to grab a phone call here. Ralph in California. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Again, pleasure talking to you. I enjoy your show. Very informative. Can you give me a brief history of Palestine where when I look it up, you know, it's hard to find more information. Well, a map of a book and all that. The history, is it considered a nation state? Was it ever, and when did it not become a nation state?
Well, Palestine has been on maps going back literally thousands of years. I have a web page at my site that I will repost during this coming commercial break for everybody to look at it. Palestine has always been there, and it has been treated as a nation state. It is only with the advent of Israel coming in and saying, oh, there really was no such thing as Palestine, that's why it's okay for us to go in and take their land. But the historical reality is that Palestine is, it's referred to in the Bible, it's shown on maps going back to ancient times, it's always been there. And, you know, the propaganda is trying to erase that memory from the public so that Israel can say, well, it was just empty land when we showed up, and Palestinians is a made-up name by the anti-Semites, which is actually a pretty good description of how they're approaching the problem. But
right, didn't McCain say something like they're not real people or something like that? Or
yeah, he declared them Untermenschen, and of course McCain says whatever Israel tells him to say, because even going back to his father, they have served Israel's interests. You need to remember that John McCain's father, Admiral McCain, was the mastermind of the cover-up of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And so they've been part and parcel of Israel's agenda. You know, it's a family tradition. We always support Israel, no matter what it does, because it's just our family tradition, and so forth and so on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Just, yeah, when you post that on there, I'd be appreciative so I can get a history.
Yeah, I will. I'll put that up next commercial break. And anyway, thanks a lot for the phone call. Now, getting over to the situation with Iran, because Netanyahu is out there screaming that Iran is making plutonium in their heavy water reactor, which, by the way, that reactor has been operating since 2002. It is under IAEA inspection. They have never found any plutonium there, you know, being weaponized and refined. It's just Netanyahu who's desperate to get this war going. Is he desperate enough to nuke an American city and claim Iran did it? He might be, because he's starting to froth at the mouth. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for Ralph in California, I did post that article, Israel and Palestine, the maps tell the story. You can go down to the bottom of that page, and there's all these scans of historical maps, all these pre-Israel references to Palestine, movies made back then, silent films made of Palestine. So it has been there all along. It is part of Israel's propaganda, along with always claiming to be the world's most perpetual victim, that Palestine never really existed. I think one of the slogans during the creation of Israel was this, a land without a people for a people without a land. But obviously with all the killing and slaughter going on when Israel was carved out of Palestine, there obviously were people there. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Several things. The debt. I keep reminding myself that debt cannot be valid. On its very face, it's denominated in a foreign fiat debt currency, for starters, which violates the
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. What do you mean denominated in a foreign currency? The U.S. debt is always expressed in terms of U.S. dollars.
So you're saying that the Federal Reserve promissory note is in reality a valid U.S. dollar?
No, I'm not. Are you talking about the Treasury bonds? Those aren't issued by the Federal Reserve. Those come from the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury prints up these pieces of ink and paper called Treasury bonds, which are pledges to tax future generations of Americans. They send them over to the Federal Reserve, which prints up their stack of ink and paper called U.S. dollars and sends them back to the government.
Okay, so what you just described as Treasury bonds, are those considered government bonds?
They're considered bonds issued by the government, but they are backed with future slave labor of Americans.
Sounds like the original consols, CONSULS consols that were issued by the Rothschild banking system back in the early 1800s.
Yeah, of course. It's all the same system. They've been playing the same scam on planet Earth for hundreds and hundreds of years. They'll change the names, but it's the same scam. To get a government to stop issuing and using its own currency interest-free and bribe enough people in the government to transfer that money creation to a privately owned bank, which then creates all the public currency as a loan at interest. We need to get back to the public currency as a public utility, which was the model this nation was started on, and stop this constant scam of the public currency as a private for-profit venture by the bankers.
Well, Mike, indeed, in 1862, Lincoln made a speech, and he delineated precisely that. He said, going to his speech right now, he says, the government should create, issue, circulate all currency and credit necessary to satisfy spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers.
Mm-hmm.
This privilege, he says, of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it's the government's greatest creative opportunity. By the adoption of these principles, taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest money.
Yeah, and as soon as Lincoln was shot dead, Congress voted to withdraw from circulation his greenbacks and throw the American people back onto dependency on banknotes issued by the private banks at interest. What Lincoln was saying was exactly the same thing that Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were saying when we kicked out the Bank of England, exactly the same thing that Andrew Jackson was saying when he shut down the Second Bank of the United States, and the same thing that John F. Kennedy said when he issued Executive Order 11110 to put $4.5 billion of United States notes into circulation to power the American commerce without accruing interest to the Federal Reserve. And of course, as soon as John F. Kennedy was shot dead, those United States notes were taken out of circulation and destroyed, throwing the American people back into dependency on the Federal Reserve and banknotes borrowed at interest. And on the Warren Commission, and let me finish this thought, on the Warren Commission, we're going to keep on hitting this as we approach the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination. On the Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank and president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is not qualified to investigate the murder of John F. Kennedy. Therefore, the reason he was there was to conceal the link to the Executive Order 11110 and the United States as one of the many motives for this organized assassination of the president.
Indeed, and to add insult to injury, we have, according to Thomas Stauffer, the consulting economist, Washington, D.C., this was 2002, where he does an audit of taxpayer donations to Israel since 1973 when they had that peace accord, right? That great peace accord. Well, $2 trillion as of 2002 in American taxpayer donations. Now, I ask you, Mike, are you far better off now than you were in 1973 with $2 trillion in donations? Not to mention the brilliant Tom Zuckheim, Pentagon Comptroller CFO, who embezzled $3 trillion from the Pentagon. And where is Tom Zuckheim when you need him the most? Like, you know,
and I don't. Whoever got that $3 trillion from the Pentagon, how very lucky they were that on 9/11, the airplane that hit the Pentagon just happened to hit the offices of the accountants trying to find where that money went. How amazingly lucky that was. And, of course, it was also amazingly lucky for the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who the day before had to go public and say, yes, the Pentagon lost $3 trillion of tax money. We don't know where it went. Should have been the financial military scandal of the decade, but of course 24 hours later, 9/11, and everybody in the corporate media forgot all about missing $3 trillion from the Pentagon, and hardly anybody in the corporate media mentioned the fact that the airplane that hit the Pentagon hit the offices of the auditors trying to find where that money had gone.
And Mike, wasn't there a woman who survived that event at the Pentagon, and she had a child with her? She came walking out of that mess. Did you hear anything about that? A woman
no,
who
I
survived,
mean, there were lots of survivors. I mean, the further away you were from the impact point, the greater your chances of surviving.
Well, she actually worked there in the Pentagon, and when she came out, she was greeted by, I guess, FBI agents or somebody, some spooks, and she was starting to talk about what you were just talking about. Apparently, she worked in that area, and they started threatening her. She had to shut up.
Oh, I'd love to find that story. I'd love to find out more about that. I was unaware of that one, but it's not surprising. I mean, we see the FBI aren't investigators. They're there to coerce the official story. We saw that down in Florida with that kid that they were trying to coerce into signing a phony confession to link the Sarnia brothers with a drug murder, and when he refused, they just shot him dead on the spot. That's what the reality of...
No wonder JFK didn't he want to terminate, disband not only the CIA, the Central Insurrection Agency, but the Federal Bureau of Insanity?
Well, Kennedy wasn't as upset with the FBI because back then the FBI was a little more under control, but Kennedy actually said he wanted to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. And it's rather interesting because going back to that Warren Commission, some of the people who were on that commission were the very CIA officials that Kennedy had fired following that Bay of Pigs disaster. Why is it that his sworn enemies somehow wound up in charge of his investigation into his assassination?
And you know what, Mike? Mark Lane, who authored The Last Word, he was on with George Norrie or George Knapp a couple years ago when he brought that book out, The Last Word, and I asked him, I was able to call in and ask, I said, what do we need to do? What do we have to do in order to take our government back? He said, we got to do what JFK planned to do. We got to dismantle and scatter to the wind the national disinformation security apparatus.
Well, certainly we have to do that to the NSA now because they have become a power unto themselves. And just like the FBI blackmailed, in fact, President Kennedy, the NSA is in a position to blackmail our entire elected government to do what the NSA thinks they want to have done. We got to take a break for Phyllis Shapley and commercials, and we will be right back. America, welcome back to our show in our second hour. And boy, isn't that a weird thing? We start talking about Israel and Palestine and the bankers, and both our connection from here on Oahu to Austin, Texas in our control room starts breaking up, and my server comes under attack. What an amazing coincidence there. So I'm busy dropping certain offending IPs into the firewall. And the server is up and running. You can still reach the website and look at all those maps and videos and everything that somebody somewhere does not want you looking at here. We're going to take a phone call. Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. You were just speaking about the Kennedy assassination, and I just got done reading, read it in one night, Jesse Ventura's book, and it's a nice little book. And it's kind of a wide swath, but I want to offer to you like a narrow viewpoint. I'm an expert marksman.
Mm-hmm.
I have sniped. I have small arms certification. I have long rifle certification. I know about guns and I know about ballistics. And there's one thing that you always say: if you find one thing that's wrong, you have to question the rest. From the ballistic standpoint and from a marksmanship standpoint, that guy did not make those shots. I have no equivocation about it. Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill the president.
Well, I mean, first of all, that Mannlicher Carcano rifle, the scope was defective. It couldn't even be aimed. But the reason that rifle was planted on him as the assassination weapon is the original plan was to frame Cuba for assassinating the U.S. president in order to bring about a second Cuban invasion. And at that particular time, because of the first attempted invasion and at the Bay of Pigs, Castro was importing Mannlicher Carcanos from Italy because they were inexpensive, and he was giving them to all of the people of Cuba, quite a contrast to the U.S. government that's trying to take all your guns away. And so that was the reason they picked that particular weapon rather than a credible weapon like a Mauser of the same vintage. But Lyndon Johnson knew that the resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis included a threat by the Soviet Union that were there another invasion of Cuba, Russia would launch a nuclear war at that point with no warning. And so Lyndon Johnson basically had to scramble to transform, he was in Cuba, he was working for Cuba, into crazed lone nut assassin. He bought off the military-industrial complex by letting them go play around in Vietnam. And basically tried to buy off everybody to just say, okay, look, we'll make it good for you, but we can't invade Cuba any longer. And I think it was having to do that is the reason why he declined to run for a second term in office.
Yeah, Mike, it's funny that you mentioned the scope, because that's always been an interest of mine. I've been pursuing this for 22 years. I mean, if you look at the Warren Commission report, which I own and I often reread, that it's in there. It says that the scope was not cited correctly. If the scope is not cited correctly, he can't make those shots. Lee Harvey Oswald, I requested through Freedom of Information, I requested his marksmanship records from the Marine Corps. He's a marksman. That is a guy that you don't want next to you on the battlefield. He can't hit anything.
Yes.
You want experts by you on the battlefield. So again, I'm just stressing that I know that is false. So if I know that is false, everyone should investigate other portions of that particular assassination.
Okay, hang on, Michael, I'm sorry to cut you off, but all of a sudden we're getting a couple of different audio feeds coming in from you. And I'm not entirely sure what's going on. Would you do me a big favor and hang up and call into the show again so we can get a clear signal, because you're making some very important points, which, again, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And at this point, of course, pretty much the overwhelming majority of Americans know the Warren Commission was a cover-up, the Warren Report a fabrication from beginning to end. And we're looking for the real motives and real agendas. And just like in a war, there's never just one reason for an assassination. What you do is you go around and you find a bunch of people who all want the same objective, but for different reasons. CIA wanted revenge. Israel wanted nuclear weapons. Federal Reserve wanted to go back to enslaving Americans to the Federal Reserve notes. The organized crime was very angry at what they perceived as Kennedy's betrayal of sicking Robert Kennedy onto organized crime. There were a lot of people who wanted Kennedy dead. The Texas oil billionaires were just absolutely incensed over the oil depletion allowance. And so a lot of people wanted Kennedy dead for different reasons, but he still wound up dead. Michael, I understand you're back on the line, and you're absolutely right. It is in the Warren Report. The rifle scope on that Mannlicher Carcano was not cited. There was no way to aim the shots using that rifle. And something else that was in the Warren Report as well. When they first got that gun, it was dusted for fingerprints, and they found absolutely none. And then after Lee Oswald was shot by Jack Rubenstein in the basement of the Dallas Police Department building, then all of a sudden the next day, magically, they redust the Mannlicher Carcano, and there's a huge, beautiful palm print from Lee Oswald on the barrel. We all know the problems with the magic bullets theory. And again, we know that the House Select Committee on Assassinations, on the basis of an audio recording of the gunshots, concluded there were more than 3 shots. There had to be at least 2 shooters. Triangulation of the sound basically indicated there were shots coming from that grassy knoll. So if you've got 2 shooters, that already says there is a conspiracy.
Yeah, when you look at just the ballistic evidence, and as far as Lee Harvey Oswald and his lack of marksmanship skills, you got to ask yourself, well, how did this guy pull this off? How did he do that? I mean, the magic bullet is just, that cracks me up, because anyone who's ever shot anything in their life realizes that a bullet deforms when it strikes anything, a piece of wood, a piece of metal, a bone. Immediately it deforms. That's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah,
and,
to maximize that front impact surface and connect the maximum kinetic energy to the target. And in theory, the magic bullet did hit the bones in John Connolly's wrist at the very least.
Oh, and we're supposed to believe it went through a seat, and then with metal components in it, and then went through 2 places on John Connolly. But that whole thing really got me. That's the first thing that I found that I was like, well, this can't be right. So I started looking at other things, and then found out that there were a lot of inconsistencies along the way. So I encourage people to research it for themselves, because I'm telling you, man, if they can kill a president, they can do pretty much anything they want.
Well, they were able to kill a president and get away with it in 1963, but it's a very different world today, because of the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons, the awareness that the Warren Report was a complete fabrication at taxpayer expense, I might add, the American people examine every single pronouncement by the government and the corporate media, looking for reasons to doubt the official story. Back 50 years ago, the American public was very naive and very innocent and very trusting, and they would listen to the TV say, oh yes, they'd hear Dan Rather talk about how that headshot rocketed Kennedy's head forward, and they'd say, oh yes, obviously the shot rocketed his head forward. And then of course we found out from the Zapruder film that in point of fact Dan Rather was lying to us all, which is the day he went from being an unknown local Texas newscaster to a network star.
Well, and then we also had to invent science with the jet effect. Physics.
I remember seeing a video they tried to set up to prove that a shot from the back would move the head backward with all these very convoluted camera angles, and I remember looking at that and saying, this is a joke. They're trying to play caroms with skulls and stuff like that. Anyway, listen, we're coming up on a commercial break, and I have to let you go. But definitely as we get into next month, November, feel free to call back and talk about this, because we are going to be hammering this very hard during the next month. And again, the most important thing that the American people need to understand is you were lied to. And we don't need to get caught up in little tiny fine minutia and details like the propagandists hope you do. We were lied to about Kennedy, 9/11, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Saddam's nuclear weapons. Now's the time to decide what will you do with a government that lies to you. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to make a reference to that last commercial you just heard from Strike Hard about accessories for your weapons. And I want to hammer home a point. We have been lied to by this government all along. It's not a new phenomenon. What is new is we now all know it. And I remember when I was in school about the time of the Kennedy assassination, we were always being told that Castro was a brutal dictator. He was an evil dictator who oppressed his people. And we heard the same thing about Saddam Hussein before they invaded. He's a brutal dictator. He's oppressing his people. And yet in both of those supposed dictatorships, the people had guns. Castro was giving them out to his people. He was arming them all. Admittedly, not very good weapons, those Mannlicher Carcanos, because he was on a budget. And the same thing with Saddam Hussein. I remember vividly this video of Saddam Hussein before the U.S. invasion, where he was just coming out of this meeting in a government building, and a crowd gathered around him of the Iraqi people, and he climbs up on top of a car to wave at them, and they're all cheering, and they've got guns. You could own fully automatic guns in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Now contrast that with the American leadership that doesn't go anywhere. They're not surrounded by 6 inches of Lexan and Kevlar, and how desperate they are to take guns away from you. So you tell me, which nations are the dictatorship and which nations actually had freedom? Because I think it's very, very obvious. And I remember coming up on 20 years ago, in fact it was virtually 20 years ago, my lovely wife Claire and I were down at the Los Angeles City Hall to get our marriage license, and it just happened to be the same day that Bill Clinton was going to be having a little soiree with the Democratic leadership of California, and we left before he showed up because I don't like crowds. and the place was just crawling with Secret Service and mounted police officer, and we walked past the platform where this get-together was going to happen, and it was just surrounded by these screens of Lexan on poles where nobody could actually see anybody without looking through all this Lexan. The only platform that had a clear view was where the media cameras were, and the media cameras were not showing all of these Lexan screens. And I remember looking at that, and my first impression was, these are politicians who are absolutely terrified of their own population. And when you see Dick Cheney running around in his armored limo that had the thick Lexan windows, and you look at that beast limousine that Obama rides around in, and you realize how afraid these people are. And how Obama, in addition to the beast, they have a couple of other cars made up to look exactly the same as they drive around. Nobody knows. That is the mark of a tyrant who is afraid his own people are waking up to what's going on. And I have to admit, even though I am not advocating violence, I've wistfully thought about having, well, not an AK-47, even though they're very, very reliable, but, you know, buy American. I'd like an AR-15 somewhere down the road where I can actually afford that kind of stuff again. Anyway, getting back to the present day, Iran is still continuing to make these very positive overtures about, let's talk about what's going on, and saying that the upcoming P5+1 conference is a chance to test U.S. sincerity about whether they want to find a peaceful solution or not. And of course, we all know the U.S. does not want to find a peaceful solution. America's foreign policy is being driven in large part by Israel, and Netanyahu is just out there frothing at the mouth, screaming that Iran has a Death Star, Iran has this, Iran has that, you've got to deal with them, don't wait, don't think, don't even look at them, just kill them. And we know, of course, that U.S. policy is very much firmly be under control of this agenda to reimpose Bretton Woods on the rest of the world and to basically support the petrodollar by forcing all the world's resource-rich areas to sell those resources only for U.S. dollars. So the U.S. can prop its economy a little bit longer by getting a piece of the action of other people's commerce. That's really what it is. It's a piece of the action mentality. And so there is no way there will be a peaceful settlement in Syria. There's no way there will be a peaceful settlement in Iran. The U.S. must invade or go bankrupt and quit, which I would prefer, and it may yet happen. But Iran has been playing by the rules. They signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They're playing by the rules of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, even as the United States does not. And Israel, which still refuses to this day to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is out there peddling nuclear weapons to other countries. Now, down in Syria, Human Rights Watch has been looking at what's going on, and they're finding the hired mercenary army has killed at least 190 civilians in their latest brutal assault in early August. And they took over 200 hostages, many of whom are still in captivity. Now remember, we are being told that this hired mercenary army represents a popular revolt against Assad. Now, a genuine revolution in a country does not succeed without public support. Public opinion has to be on the side of the revolutionaries. And so a revolutionary, a genuine revolutionary, is not going to go out and commit acts that will destroy that popular support. You didn't see George Washington or Thomas Jefferson running around burning down colonial churches, going into colonial schools and killing the children. You saw the British doing that. And so when this opposition group is committing these kinds of crimes, it is proclaiming to the world, these are not real Syrians against Assad. It is a hired mercenary army attempting a covert overthrow and so far failing miserably. Apparently the rebels are parading their child hostages on YouTube. Support us against Assad or we'll kill your children. That's not a real revolution. That's a terror campaign being organized and operated by a covert external overthrow. 95% of the so-called Free Syria army are not Syrian. We're going to grab a phone call here. Jim in Illinois. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hear your voice. You there?
Yes, I'm there. You're on the air.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, today I heard earlier in some other broadcasts that some of our high-ranking generals and admirals have been, which handle nuclear weapons, have been cashiered out of their position. Thing is my concern is who is in control of our nuclear arsenal. And when I say "our," those, just like the parks and everything, those weapons are the people's, you know, and I'm just
well, I'm
terrified.
willing to concede that those things should be kept under lock and key. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and I may be wrong on this, I'm aware of only one high-ranking person who's been removed from office, and that is the second-in-command at the Strategic Air Command, which has command authority over America's nuclear arsenal. And it happened the week after we got a report that a nuclear weapon had been transferred to the East Coast without the appropriate paper trail. Now, this guy got fired supposedly over a gambling scandal, and it just doesn't pass the smell test.
The gambling scandal has been reported that was a trumped-up charge. See, the thing is, you know, we know that, you know, corporatism is such a large thing, or fascism in our nation right at the moment. Well, who's to say that, you know, some cabal of corporate individuals wouldn't get one of these weapons, man? It scares the crap out of them.
Well, I don't think the corporations are, but certainly Israel is well motivated to stage a nuclear false flag to get the war against Iran going. Our government is desperate enough to try a new 9/11 involving a nuclear weapon. We cannot rule that out. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and finishing up on Syria. As you're probably aware, all of these corporate media news shows will have these so-called independent experts to come in and speak about why we must go to war and so forth. But apparently the Public Accountability Initiative, which is a nonprofit research group, has started chastising the corporate media for inevitably having these so-called independent experts who have ties to the defense industry. They're out there selling their products, selling their bonds, so forth and so on. By the way, the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize did not go to Edward Snowden. It went to the chemical weapons inspectors in Syria, who, as of this last inspection, were told not to assign responsibility, so the U.S. could scream it was Assad, even though the evidence overwhelmingly pointed it was another false flag by the hired mercenaries. John Bolton was on Fox earlier today saying, Syria's hiding chemical weapons. Don't trust them. Bomb them. Bomb them. The only good Syrian's a dead Syrian. All right, well, John, if you feel that way, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. I'm going to skip on down my talking points. I want to get to something that's rather important ahead of Claire coming on the show. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the reason why the Obama administration is continuing to push for Obamacare, even though the computer system absolutely does not work, is not signing people up, is because when Congress raises the debt ceiling, and we know they will, that doesn't solve the problem unless the U.S. government can find people to loan it money, and I mean real money, value-based money. They can't just go back to the Federal Reserve and say, print us up a whole new bunch of cash, because that increases downward pressure on the dollar and makes matters worse. So the only way they can get new borrowers in other countries, other banks, other governments, to buy those U.S. Treasury bonds, is to say, see, we've got all of these brand new tax revenues coming in. We're going to get $200 billion a year in added tax revenues from Obamacare. And when that one doesn't work, they're waving around the carbon tax. They're still pushing that one. Obama is still talking up, we must have a carbon tax to save planet Earth. And that was the reason that we had a couple of weeks ago this brouhaha in the corporate media about how the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had issued a new report saying that they're 95% convinced that all global warming is the fault of humans, which is an absolutely unsupportable statement. And inside its own report, the IPCC admitted that, yeah, there actually hasn't been any warning for 16 years now. So the new spin is the warming is hiding. It's on hiatus. It's on pause. And it will leap out and destroy the Earth in the next generation, long after you are dead and gone and no longer able to say, hey, I don't think you're telling us the truth. And that's the new one. And I had a little bit of fun earlier today and yesterday at this CNN article, Climate Change to Drive Annual Temps to New Highs Within a Generation. And I went in there and I started very calmly posting the reasons to doubt this story, that it is just a cash grab by Al Gore, who wanted to do to planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron did to California with electricity. And by the way, Enron's Ken Lay helped Al Gore set up the carbon exchange. That tells you a lot right there. Pointed out how 10 years ago the carbon Nazis were out there saying snow's a thing of the past. And here we are with another record-setting winter. The Dakotas got hit with a record snowstorm. They got in 3 days as much snow as they normally get in the entire month of October. We're now getting word from Bavaria and Austria. They got hit with a snowstorm that was so severe it shut down the train system. Massive blackouts over there. And, of course, the carbon Nazis come out and say, oh, we're talking about averages, you know, and global warming causes snowstorms, which is a complete reverse of what they were saying 10 years ago. So I carried on this debate, and I linked the article to whatreallyhappened.com, and especially this one guy, Scott Hinsdale, that was just following me around trying to refute everything I was saying, and finally resorted to name-calling and screaming, and finally said, you're a moron, and I am out of here, which I interpreted as a white flag of surrender. But the reason they're still pushing this nonsense, even as another harsh winter descends on us all, is because they're not concerned about carbon dioxide. They're not concerned about the quality of life on planet Earth. They are desperate to have another justification to take more money away from you to prop up this crumbling pyramid scheme of a central bank. That is their only agenda right now for everything that federal government is doing. More money from you so the bankers can have more, so they can keep on fighting these wars of conquest to drive the world back into Bretton Woods, drive the world back into dependence on the petrodollar, drive the world into private central banking. And that's why they're still, even as the icicles are forming over the northern hemisphere, and the Arctic ice actually grew 67% over what it was last year. They're still out there saying, we have all these highly paid scientists. They have a consensus. They are all saying this is what's happening. Don't open your eyes. Don't look out your window. Don't look at your own thermometer. Trust these scientists. They are recognized authorities because we say they are recognized authorities, and they say that we're right when you icky-poo humans are causing global warming, and that giant glowing ball of fusing hydrogen gas up in the sky has got nothing to do with it. So you wait. Somewhere between now and before the snow gets really too heavy, you're going to see Obama get up there and talk about we must add a carbon tax. Because if he can't get new tax revenues coming in, nobody is going to loan this government any more money. And that's just where they are, and it shows how fragile that entire system has become. Would you loan this government any money if you had it? They very clearly, with all the tax revenues they're collecting now and not spending on you, the people, they can't pay their bills. They can't even meet the interest payments, let alone pay down any of the principal. So that's why we're seeing all this brouhaha about forcing everybody into Obamacare. It's all about creating new tax revenues with which to lure new borrowers in. And they're going to do it with Obamacare. They're going to do it with a carbon tax. Who knows what else they'll come up with? A tax on the rain. A tax on whatever. They're just grasping at straws to find some way to trick you out of more of your money to prop up this failed Ponzi scheme central bank. And it doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you sacrifice, it can't be done. It's going to come down. They always do. Every pyramid collapses. So, we posted some links to some photos coming in from that European snowstorm. They make lovely picture postcards. But, all that snow, the carbon Nazis were saying was a thing of the past 10 years ago. It's back. It's amazing. Alrighty, let's see. Moving right along here. Let's talk about fracking here a little bit. Over in Great Britain, see, other countries seem to learn from the United States' mistakes. United States went full bore into GMO. It's wonderful. It's great. You will love it. And other countries looked at what's happening with GMO and saying, we're not going to do what the U.S. did. We're seeing the same thing with fracking, because apparently the European Union is now slowing down on this rush to fracking because of the problem of uncontrolled methane emissions. Same thing we've been seeing here in the United States of America. Those wells are not sealed. Methane is seeping up. It's getting into the drinking water supply. People are opening up their taps and they can set fire to what's coming out of there. Methane is bubbling into rivers and lakes, and it depletes the water of oxygen, and you have these huge fish die-offs all over the place. Plus, the methane can accumulate in basements, leading to explosions. Plus, all these toxic chemicals that are being poured down these wells, primarily to get rid of the toxic chemicals, and it's coming back up in the well water. France has outright prohibited fracking in their country, citing its damage to the environment. We're going to take a phone call here. Curtis in Florida. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Michael, your divining rod to tell conspiracy nonsense from conspiracy fact and truth is amazingly accurate, in my opinion. But I'm not everywhere. I don't know things, but you seem to separate out so well the flying saucers and the mystic nonsense from the actual, real, rotten being of what government is doing wrong so often. You're amazing. I love your program. No sarcasm, complete sincerity. You must have an incredible deciphering of knowing the garbage from the truth. And that was one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say was some callers said that Earth is always changing. It's unstable. I say that the Earth is incredibly stable, considering the 4 billion years I think it's been in existence. In my opinion,
okay, Curtis,
stable.
Curtis, we got to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up, because I want to come back to this when we come back from these words from our sponsors. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Curtis in Florida about whether or not nature and Earth is stable, and this balance of nature is a romantic notion, but it is simply unsupported by the facts that are out there. We know now that Earth's orbit is actually slightly unstable, and over 100,000-year cycles oscillates between circular and more elliptical. And during the more elliptical, we get the ice ages, and during the more circular, we get the interglacial periods. Earth is a dynamic system. It is constantly changing, and there's one illustration of how dramatic that can be. When we go back and look at the first life that evolved on planet Earth, it would absolutely die in the environment we have here today, because the atmosphere was different, the contents of the ocean was very different. With all due respect to Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg, this idea of recreating the dinosaurs from their DNA would not work unless you kept them under a giant glass dome where you recreated the atmosphere of the Cretaceous, which had far more oxygen than we do today. So the environment is always changing, and successful life forms adapt to deal with that change. But it is always changing. This idea that Earth can be locked in a particular and rather arbitrarily decided configuration is complete and utter nonsense. It can't be done. Curtis, are you there?
I am there. There's several different eccentricities to our orbit. It wobbles one way, and then it has a million-year wobble, and it has a glacier wobble, and just the moon wobbles in and out. You have a big moon and all that. I realize that. But I'm not looking at 100,000 years, Michael. You could do better. No human could create a system where the sun and the earth would stay alight for each other for 5 billion years. That is the mark of a divine creator.
Well, I would have to disagree with you here, because what we have here now in terms of our solar system are those planets that survived for 4.5 billion years. And we know from the asteroid belt that obviously some planets didn't survive. Only a few days ago, astronomers discovered a planet about 80 light years from Earth that isn't orbiting a sun anymore. So obviously something got chaotic. Either two stars passed close to each other and yanked them out of orbit. What we have here...
I should name that planet Obama.
I second the motion on that one. I absolutely second the motion on that one. But, you know, the problem is with our very limited lifespan of 70, 80 years, we really don't see these changes taking place all the time. But again, when Kepler discovered orbital mechanics, the assumption was that the planets are in their orbits and that's where they stay. We know now that orbits do change slowly over time because of the influence of the gravity fields of these other planets. We know things collide. Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 plowed into Jupiter. According to Russian astronomers, there's going to be a heck of an asteroid wallop onto Mars next year. You know, nature is changed, nature is chaos, nature is careening through time, banging off the walls and stumbling over itself, and that is absolutely the reality. We can't fight climate change because change is what the climate has always done and will always do.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that, Michael. I'm not for believing in man-made climate change because I don't believe it myself because there's bigger forces, far bigger than us. But I do the saying that 5 billion years for a star isn't long enough for you, Michael. I'm sorry. That's a long time to have a star of basically the same intensity for the Earth to orbit around.
Wait a minute. You're making an assumption there that the sun has always been the same intensity, and that is also not supported by history.
I know. I'm just saying overall enough for life to exist and not be turned into Mercury or frozen into Pluto. That's just pretty good.
Well, hang on a second. Let me give you one more point here. You're basically coming from a position of species chauvinism, and I know a lot of scientists do that where they're out there looking for life as we know it, and people like to say, isn't it amazing that the Earth is in just the right place, that we're comfortable here? They've got it backward. We're comfortable on Earth because we evolved here. Life that evolves on other worlds will be quite comfortable there. And we don't know what other basis for life is out there. We could have life based on silicon. There could be life in those methane pools on Titan. There could even be life based on helium-3 crawling around on Pluto. We don't really know, but we shouldn't assume...
Michael, I'm not a chemist. If you would read The Disappearing Spoon by a doctorate in chemistry, he explains why there could not be life based on silicon. He's a doctor and chemist. I'm not.
Okay.
But read The Disappearing Spoon or Google that passage on why it has to be carbon. Silicon is too big. It gives you chemical reasons and physics reasons. All I can do is conjecture. All right, well, I just want to go to bat for God creating a stable Earth and Sun.
Well, the problem is it's not stable. We're going to let you go here because we're coming up on the top of the hour here.
Sure.
But, you know, you're basically starting from the assumption that the sun has had the same luminance and energy during its entire life, and there's no way to really know that. What we do know is the sun goes through cycles, the 11-year sunspot cycle, the 22-year magnetic pole reversal. We know there was the Maunder minimum that triggered the Little Ice Age. We appear to be going into a repeat of that. Again, Russian astronomers are saying they think there are longer cycles not yet detected in the sun because we've only been able to study the sun scientifically for about 100 years, which is long enough to pick up on the 11 and 22-year cycles. But if we're looking at cycles over periods of hundreds of years, Maunder minimum to the present, obviously we don't have enough data to make any conclusions about that. And as far as what the sun was doing before humans were even alive, there are indications in the geological and fossil record that solar output has gone through severe transitions. And again, we shouldn't assume that all life in the universe has to be life as we know it here under these environmental conditions. I used to get into arguments with all these production staffs on these movies about aliens who arrive on Earth in advanced technology spaceships and then they walk off the spaceship totally naked. You know, I mean, to save money on costumes. Now, fortunately, you know, like George Lucas understood that that was ridiculous, and he put his aliens in various costumes and spacesuits like that. But, you know, an alien civilization coming to visit the Earth is probably going to find this a very hostile environment unless they evolved on a planet exactly like ours, and that is a really remote possibility. Now, I know, because of my experience on Viking, that we did absolutely find evidence of indigenous life on Mars, even though, for political reasons, NASA kind of looked the other way. That life that is on Mars, and it may be the remains of a more abundant life, that, you know, Mars did lose its water over time, but it's probably comfortable there because that's where it evolved. Look at the extremophiles here on Earth. Life forms that live in boiling water, life forms that live below freezing. If they weren't comfortable there, they'd probably go someplace else. And it basically tells us that the way the system works is the environment is always dynamically changing on Earth and everywhere else, and the successful life forms adapt to be comfortable in that environment. Earth isn't magically in the right place for us to be comfortable on it. We are comfortable on it because we grew up here over billion years of evolution. This is our home. And other life on other planets are going to be comfortable where they are, even though they could be incredibly inhospitable places to us. It's the way it works. All righty then. Do we have any more callers, or are the lines empty? Nope. Okay, there we are. Getting back to this fracking situation, and apparently the Dakotas are just getting it between the snowstorm and everything like that. Apparently in North Dakota there has been a fracking fluid spill of 865,000 gallons, which, due to the government shutdown, has not been reported to the public, but it basically makes it one of the biggest onshore oil spills in recent U.S. history. Alrighty, let's skip on back up here and pick up a few more current stories here. There's a scandal that is brewing among military families. Now, as you know, certainly for those of you of the Vietnam generation, there was always the issue of the missing POWs and the MIAs, and part of the problem was that a lot of people simply deserted and just made new lives for themselves in that part of the world. Nothing new there. Happened in World War II as well. Apparently, the Pentagon has been faking the repatriation of fallen soldiers, burying empty caskets, a fake airplane, and everything to try and keep the lid on that desertion scandal. We'll be back after Phyllis Shapley and commercials with the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get to the Lady Claire, I want to cover a couple of things. First of all, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is now in our control room handling the telephones. I got an email from a listener saying, you mentioned a tax on rain on your program today. Well, guess what? It's already happening here in Philadelphia.
Oh, no.
Several years ago, the city started to add a sewer runoff charge to the water bills. What they say they can do is calculate the volume of rainwater, which you have no control over when it falls on your house, and it runs off each property into their sewer system, which they monetize and then charge each property owner a monthly fee to handle the additional water. Now, the first thing that occurs to me is that fresh rainwater falling into the sewers is going to help clean it out and free of debris. But yes, they're just taxing everything. Next, there'll be a fresh air tax or something like that. Well, I guess that's what the carbon tax is supposed to be all about. Yep. Fox News is now reporting that Boehner and Obama promised they'll go on talking. So that deal that they were hinting about yesterday for a 6-week temporary raising of the debt ceiling turned out to, in fact, be dead on arrival, but it sure got that Dow market up yesterday. And I know that this final admission that there is no deal was not made public until just after the stock market closed. So they got their Friday happy ending to keep all those money junkies happy. All right, for those of you watching on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, and she joins us every Friday in the third hour with her unique perspective on what's going on. What's first on your list?
Well, dear, I believe that Israel's Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, has done it again. He's put his foot in his mouth down so far that he may have perfected the self-performed tonsillectomy. I don't know. But he is warning the UK, which is beginning to rethink its ties with Iran. Oh, you can't do that because not unless Iran completely dismantles its nuclear weapons program and stops calling for the annihilation of the State of Israel.
Okay, well, I want to insert a comment here.
Yeah.
Netanyahu is not calling for the dismantling of Iran's nuclear weapons program. They're calling for the dismantling of Iran, the whole thing, the power stations, the medical isotopes, which are commercial competition for Israel's exports. They want it all done. You can't call for the dismantling of Iran's nuclear weapons program because nobody can find. It's not there.
It's not there.
It's not there. What Netanyahu wants is for Iran to basically shut it all down, and Iran's not going to do that. They've invested a huge amount of money in that power station.
They know the oil is not going to last forever, and I think it was very far-sighted of them to join the NNPT to use nuclear energy in a peaceful way.
And, you know, back when Iran signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, of course, it was still under the control of the U.S. puppet Shah, and it was in the American media, what a wonderful thing, Iran is joining the nuclear modern world. And then, of course, when the Iranian people got sick and tired of being abused by this U.S. puppet regime, and they kicked the Shah out in 1979, and all of a sudden, oh, we can't let the other guys have nuclear power. And that's what Netanyahu is doing. And what's really interesting is that Netanyahu appears to be in a state of panic. Following his very disappointing performance at the United Nations, he's just running around screaming at everybody. All of Israel's parasitic sycophants here in the United States, like John Bolton, they're all over the media saying, oh, we've got to do this, we've got to do Iran. Don't listen to them, don't look at them, just the only good Iranian's a dead Iranian. And they're trying to get this war agenda going again, and that is why I'm very concerned as we hear stories about nuclear weapons traveling across the United States without the appropriate paper trail. Are they desperate enough to try a new 9/11? We know that only a few years ago Donald Rumsfeld was recorded saying that we needed a new 9/11 to remind Americans of the dire threat from all those nations that we wanted to invade and steal their oil.
And also the statement that he makes about Iran's government wants the annihilation of the State of Israel, that's a lie. He knows it's a lie. It's a complete mistranslation of what Ahmadinejad said. And yeah, Ahmadinejad, as president of Iran, could, I think, correctly be characterized as kind of a blowhard. But what he said was that Israel was going to go away, was going to collapse. I mean, every civilization, Mike, has what you might call a life cycle.
I think both the U.S. and Israel are going to collapse. Certainly when the U.S. collapses, Israel, without that lifeline of American weapons and dollars, is going to be in dire trouble, which is why they're already leaping over the border onto Canada. But forget about all this screaming and rhetoric and frothing at the mouth from Netanyahu and look at history. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years. Certainly they have not done so since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And that stands in stark contrast to the United States and Israel that can't seem to go 6 months without bombing and killing somebody.
Nope.
And, you know, again, look at Israel. Israel is wiping Palestine off the map. Israel grabbed a part of Syria. Israel's invaded Egypt. Israel keeps on invading Lebanon. Iran is not the problem. Netanyahu is.
And the absolute bombast of his my way or the highway approach on Iran is beginning to grate mightily, and it's making him, and consequently the Israeli people who worked like crazy to get this guy elected, look very foolish.
Well, I think
indeed.
You're assuming that the Israeli elections are somehow more honest than those here in the United States of
no,
America.
Dear, you're probably absolutely
right. I wouldn't do that. But it is interesting because Netanyahu has reached the point where the world is tuning him out because they know Israel's lied so many other times. They've been screaming about Iran is months away from a nuclear bomb going back to 1985, and we've been watching Netanyahu scream, wolf, 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 nuclear duck, nuclear duck, nuclear duck, and people aren't listening to him anymore, and he doesn't know how to deal with that.
No.
He absolutely, and that's why he's out there with the hysterical, and he's like I said, he's frothing at the mouth right now, and people are just tuning him out.
And because if Iran was xenophobic toward Jews in general, why would they not be murdering the Jews in Iran, one of the longest practicing Jewish communities on this planet? And the short answer is they're not xenophobic toward Jews, but they have some legitimate, reasonable questions about how the Israeli government is treating the Palestinians. And what Netanyahu seems to want to do every darn time is change the subject.
Well, of course they want to change the subject because, you know, Israel doesn't really have any justifications for what it's doing, whether it's dispossession of the Palestinians, invading Lebanon, invading Syria, invading Egypt. It's always, oh, we're victims, we're surrounded by enemies, we must strike first, which of course is the same excuse that Hitler used to invade Poland and take the world into World War II. But we all know that's what is going on with Netanyahu and Israel. Israel is the cause of all the upset in the Middle East, and for a very, very simple fundamental reason. Israel's always going out there demanding that everybody recognize the right of the Jewish state to exist. But Israel will not grant that right to the other nations around that.
Right.
Palestine has been saying all along, Palestine will recognize Israel's right to exist 1 second after Israel recognizes Palestine's right to exist. But Israel won't do that. That is the hypocrisy on which the last 60-odd years of bloodshed is resting, that Israel demands for itself what it will not grant to anybody else.
And the reality is, Israel doesn't want peace. It wants territory, and by any means necessary. Snip a little of this off, dispossess Palestinians, dispossess some Bedouins, call it a military practice.
That's their idea of Mideast peace. I want a piece of that one, I want a piece of that one, I want a piece of that one.
Oh, yeah.
But the other reality is that because Israel's ability to manage its own population rests on the propaganda of perpetual victimhood and war.
And fear.
And fear.
Yeah.
Peace would be a disaster for the current Israeli government because the Israeli people would say, okay, we're not under dire threat of extermination. Is this government really running the nation for the benefit of the Israeli people? And the answer is no. They've been having major protests in Tel Aviv. They even set up a guillotine in Tel Aviv a couple of months back. So the Israeli people are no more happy with the government of Israel than the people of Iran or the people of the United States of America.
Absolutely. I'd like to go on to a new segment that I would like to introduce in our Friday program.
Okay, well, we've got to take a break for commercials,
okay, and then
we can introduce after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and insert drum roll here.
Yes, I thought it would be fitting on these Friday shows to have a new segment, and this is what I call the Corporate Wedgie Monger of the Week. And you know who you are out there.
Who is our debut nominee?
Our debut nominee today is the corporation United Healthcare in Connecticut. They have just sent pink slips to over 1,000 doctors who were treating Medicare recipients on a silver program, Medicare Advantage program that they offer. And now, there is nothing a big corporation does where the timing isn't very valuable here. And one thing I see is that open enrollment for Medicare starts next Tuesday, and it's still not clear at this time as to which doctors are still in the United Network. And so, okay, if these Medicare patients were to receive care under Obamacare, which starts its rollout next Tuesday, why have these physicians axed? Is it possible that United Healthcare is looking to make it more difficult for patients to see their doctors and perhaps dying because immediate care was not available? I mean, Michael, this is the only thing I can think of. If they say to you, well, you can see your primary care physician in 4 months, and they can't wait 4 months.
That may be difficult because apparently one of the rule changes under Obamacare is that hospital admission is only possible with the consent of your primary care giver. And
if he can't see you or she can't see you, that's right.
So you're paying more and more money for more expensive insurance with sky-high deductibles, and they're literally putting roadblocks in the way of actually getting medical care, because the goal of this is to maximize profits to the health insurance companies and to the health care companies, on which they will pay taxes to a government desperate for more money to support more borrowing.
So I frankly think that there is no other logical decision for this corporate decision. And it is painfully apparent to me, Mike, that United Healthcare has just become United Healthcare Death Panel, wanting to reduce or completely eliminate providing health care to older retired Americans because it's quote-unquote too costly, and work exclusively with a younger, healthier demographic.
Well, you know, when you have your health care decisions being decided by money junkies, it makes perfect sense. Why spend thousands of dollars, you know, healing this old retired person because they're not going to put anything back into the economy? They're not working any longer. We're going to spend all the attention on these young people that we can look forward to, you know, a working life of 40, 50 years that we will make taxes on.
And the older people in the Medicare system are just expendable.
Well, if they're loyal Americans, they ought to just go off and die and stop being a burden on the system here.
I mean, that's the philosophy.
You know, it's starting to look like Logan's Run a lot around here.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
What's next on your list?
Next on the agenda is Committee to Protect Journalists issues scathing report on the Obama administration. And it's a new report which has been released by a very respected Committee to Protect Journalists on its first ever press freedoms report in the U.S. underscores just how extreme the threat is to press freedom posed by this administration.
Well, I think some people were observing that Obama is as paranoid about press leaks as Nixon was.
Maybe more.
For some very, very good reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're seeing not only attacks on the independent media, but clearly there are attacks on the corporate media. This idea of the Department of Justice spying on reporters en masse to discourage whistleblowing, very, very clearly. And all I can say to the corporate media is, welcome to our world.
Yep.
You know, we've been warning you for 20 years this was coming. You didn't want to listen.
No, you didn't.
You know,
come over for tea someday. We have a lot to talk about.
We certainly do. Too busy reporting on, you know, the actor who died of a drug overdose, and what a terrible impact it was on his TV show.
Yeah.
All right.
And the only thing I can draw from this, courtesy of the last two administrations, this country has moved from the land of the free and the home of the brave to the land of the surveilled and the home of the cowed. And, you know, it's really nasty that we have at least another 3 years to have to deal with this.
You're being an optimist.
Right.
This isn't going to hold together much longer. I'd like to insert a comment here because Fox News did just air some coverage of the Million Veteran March that's coming into Washington, D.C., with all these veterans who are very angry over the closing of the memorials, the severing of payments. It's a huge crowd there in D.C., and unfortunately makes it a very ripe target for a false flag or agent provocateurs.
Oh, yeah.
So if you are listening to my broadcast and you're one of these truckers or one of these
bikers.
veterans or the bikers or the banner hangers, peaceful, 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 be on guard for somebody with their, you know, that smelly guy with a stick of dynamite. He works for the FBI.
Right, absolutely.
Throw him off the overpass.
Keep it
right in front of a truck.
And keep it safe.
Yes.
Amen. I would like to move to another story that really caught my attention. An Illinois woman had to have reconstructive surgery after a cop slammed her face into a concrete
I saw
bench.
that video. There was no reason for that officer
Holy
to do that.
Hieronymus Bosch.
She's walking back into the cell. She's standing in the door, and the cop just two arms shoved her. 110 pounds, she flew across the cell, and she landed with her cheekbone against the edge of this bench that was cast into the concrete of the cell.
Right. And within minutes, blood was pooling from her head as she lay on the floor. Now, apparently, this is how Chicago's police like to interpret to protect and serve. So please forgive me if I stay away from the city as though it were kryptonite. But unfortunately, this incident is simply a symptom of the growing militarization of U.S. police all across this country, and whose members believe that they collectively have the right to do whatever they please to do to any citizen, no matter what the laws are. And of course, this brings up the Israelification of military training in this country.
Well, that's part of it.
Yeah.
The overuse by police officers of SSRIs that was documented in Florida is another part of it. And behind all of it, of course, is a process of psychological repression to have the police so brutalize the public that they just stand there paralyzed, afraid to do anything lest they're going to be tased or tear gassed or pepper sprayed or shoved into concrete.
It's the Israeli-Palestinian model.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The American police are being to treat the American public the way the Israelis treat the Palestinians. And what a wonderful, rousing success that has been to date.
Yes. I would also like to take a little pivot here to another story that caught my attention. Apparently, John Kerry is in Afghanistan to push to keep U.S. troops in the country after 2014. Please.
Ooh, big surprise, that one. We have been telling you all along that all of this, and you remember when Obama was first campaigning in 2008 and he said, you can take it to the bank. As soon as I'm president, I will end these wars and bring our kids home.
Yes.
Oh, my stars and garters, you mean the president lied to us? He can't do it. He's the president. He's black. He's wonderful. He wouldn't lie to American people. But
apparently this week,
yes,
Karzai said that he was prepared to walk away from the bilateral security agreement talks if Afghanistan was not happy with its conditions.
Well, how lucky for Obama that Karzai only has another 6 months in office and then another U.S. lackey gets elected to that position.
Well, maybe, maybe not. American officials say that they're ready to suspend negotiations absent a breakthrough in the coming weeks. And with Hamid, and that there wasn't really much chance of being able to negotiate this with Karzai's successor.
Okay, now here's what's really going on there, all joking aside.
Yeah.
We know that Russia has already informed the United States through secretaries of state Hillary Clinton and John Kerry.
Right.
That when the U.S. goes into Iran, Russia will pour in weapons and material and supplies on the other side, turn it into a new Vietnam, and grind the United States down in a war of attrition, which Russia has the resources to do and the U.S. does not. More about this when we come back from these commercials.
Right.
Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're talking about Afghanistan, and what's really going on here, again, is that Russia has already informed the United States of America that when the United States invades Iran, Russia will support Iran with supplies, weapons, munitions, everything they need to turn Iran into a brand new Vietnam and grind the United States down in a war of attrition. And Russia has the economic might to do it because they've got a huge trade surplus as opposed to the United States, which has a major trade deficit, is broke, hopelessly in debt. And Russia understands that supporting Iran by air will be very expensive, so they need land routes with which to send material down into Iran. And there are two. The first is that strip of land between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, and those well-guarded tunnels through the Caucasus Mountains. That's why the U.S. and Israel were up there trying to get a war going between Ossetia and Georgia to make that route unpassable. That has failed. The second land route is through, Afghanistan. And that is why the United States is desperate to keep U.S. military forces in Afghanistan to deny it as a convoy route to Russia to supply Iran with.
Then, Mike, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
I think that within the Taliban movement, they feel that all they have to do ultimately is wait, and the country will be theirs again. What if they create, rather than fighting in the streets, a political movement that overwhelms anything else Karzai could do?
Well,
is that possible?
Not really, and for the same reason that Ron Paul couldn't get any traction in 2008 and 2012. The system is rigged against him. And by the way, we just got a news story. Apparently over in Ohio, their legislature is considering a bill that would ban all third parties. You will vote for Republicans. You will vote for the Democrats. You will not have any other parties, you Schweinhund. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And Karzai or his successor will basically pretty much do the same thing. In fact, any nation in history that was taken over by a covert U.S. puppet regime has always passed laws to ban any opposing parties from starting up or gaining any traction. I mean, this is the way that, we have control. We will keep control no matter what it takes. But if you look at a map and you look at the lines of communication between Russia and Iran, you will understand why Afghanistan is so important and why that strip of land between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea is so important. And I would not at all be surprised when the U.S. goes into Iran and Russia comes on the other side, I would not be surprised to see the United States actually nuke the entrances to all those tunnels on the Caucasus Mountain to try and close them off.
Wow. And hasn't Russia deployed some military hardware into that area rather recently, I believe?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Russia is deploying armed forces around the North Shore of both the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. They might be considering attempting to use ships to take material across those two seas, but they'd be very easy targets for an airstrike. Everybody's moving their pieces into position because at this point, and for reasons I've already mentioned, the United States is absolutely committed to continuing the invasion of Syria and Iran and other nations after that, because this campaign to reimpose Bretton Woods on the entire world is an all-or-nothing deal. They have to go the distance.
Right.
Because if they only have half the world that is going through the dollar, and the U.S. is getting a piece of the action of that commerce and driving up prices, the rest of the world will simply go to those nations that aren't going through the dollar, and the whole system will fail. And that's why this war agenda, despite all the talk about Saddam's nukes and Iran's nukes and Assad's gas, it's all about forcing the world back into using the dollar for all commerce so that the Federal Reserve gets a piece of the action of every transaction on the face of the earth. What the Federal Reserve did to the people of the United States of America, Bretton Woods did to the entire planet. The planet is now turning away from that deal, so by golly, we got to invade those uppity world citizens and tell them they will bow down and worship the U.S. dollar.
There's only one minor problem with that.
Oh, tell us.
Right now in its history, the U.S. military does not have the troop strength. It doesn't have the manufacturing. That's all been outsourced to Asia, etc. And it doesn't have the
money.
The money,
It doesn't have.
yes.
It doesn't have the wealth.
Yes.
You know, the more the Federal Reserve prints out, the worse, the less the dollar is worth. And I don't think any other countries on earth are going to loan money to the United States to start World War III.
No.
And what that means is, if they continue into this war with Iran, which will bring us into war with Russia and China, somewhere between that point and final capitulation, the United States will resort to this nuclear arsenal that they have been upgrading and improving over the last 20 years. And that's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock.
Yeah. So what do we do to derail it?
We stand up, as we're doing this weekend. We, the people of the United States of America, stand up and we deliver a message to the rest of planet Earth. We, the people of the United States of America, do not support what this government and what this banking system are doing. We don't agree with it. We know they are lying to achieve their aims. We are not part of it. And at the very least, what we can accomplish by getting noisy and visible is so that future history will not collectively demonize all Americans for the crime of a very tiny few in government, the way our contemporary history tends to demonize all Germans for the crimes of the Nazis.
Absolutely. I would like to move our focus over to Africa.
Okay.
And a very interesting development has gone down there. NATO is considering a Libyan security assistance request. The reported abduction of Libya's prime minister early Thursday has exposed the shortcomings in the country's security sector. But NATO and Libya are not able to see eye to eye on creating terms of a 5-month-old request from Libya for assistance aimed at bolstering its defenses.
Okay, what's going on here is simple. Libya under Gaddafi was doing great. Their standard of living was up, and then Gaddafi establishes a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, and informs the rest of the world that if they want to buy Libya's oil, they have to pay for it with the gold dinar, which means manufactured products and produce will be flowing into Libya in order to buy Libya's oil. Well, that can't be allowed to stand, so the U.S. goes on in. They kill Gaddafi, they destroy the state central bank. Nobody even knows where the gold for the gold dinar went to. They've got a brand new private central bank issuing the public currencies a loan at interest, and the people of Libya, for some strange, picky reason, don't like that. And they're fighting back against that U.S. puppet regime, and the U.S. puppet regime is starting to lose. And so now they're trying to basically get NATO, meaning mostly the United States, to come back in and crush down those pesky Libyan people who think somehow that Libya should belong to them.
Gee, you think.
You think.
And speaking of economics, there was an article that caught my eye from Blacklisted News. And apparently Asian policymakers already have 6 trillion forex in a safety net. And what they've been doing...
Well, it's a safety net under Forex, because they're expecting the value of the dollar to take a major hit imminently, and they need that cushion to cover the losses. And it undermines the claims we're getting from the American corporate media that we just can't allow the dollar to stop being the global currency because it'll wreck the whole world, and that is not true. The rest of the world is already delinking from the dollar and moving away. When the U.S. goes down, it's going to take probably all the global private central banks with it, but the rest of the nations and the people, they're going to be just fine. They know what's coming.
And as we've said to our listeners and our readers, please don't panic. Plan for yourselves. And we would suggest to not have any more currency in your financial institution than you need to pay the bills. Have the rest under your direct control. And purchase, it's not a bad thing to purchase small amounts of gold and silver, not high enough that you're leaving a paper trail, but small enough that just under the radar.
And of course, this is an opportunity for us to remind all of our listeners about the Republic Trading Group.
Yes.
Which they have a banner ad at my website. They have a banner ad over at republicbroadcasting.org. You can get very good prices on physical silver and gold. And of course, proceeds, a portion of the proceeds from those sales do help fund our network, because we don't, for some strange reason, we're not able to get these big checks from Monsanto and Syngenta and Dow Chemical and General Dynamics. They don't even answer our phone calls anymore.
No.
So we do rely on you buying your physical silver and gold from Republic Trading Group and occasionally going over and hitting that donate button at republicbroadcasting.org. We really are the People's Radio Network. We don't have any corporate sponsorship. We don't have any shadowy non-governmental organizations helping to fund us. So we really do rely very much on your help. And we're in the fight for the future not only of the Republic and the American people, but literally with the risk of global nuclear war over the Federal Reserve note, we're fighting for the future of the planet. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And you had one more topic you wanted to cover.
I did. And it's something that is scary. And the title of the article is Yellen Props Up Stocks and Other Scary Data Points. And apparently for this writer, blogger, the alarm bells went off. Yellen props stocks. Somebody needs to. Politicians in Washington are actively contemplating on how to most effectively send the largest and brokest debtor in the history of the universe into default. Now, we've been there before, folks. This is not, it's being hyped. And this, how many times has this happened in the U.S.'s history?
The U.S. has defaulted several times before, and it wasn't the end. This is basically all about scaring you, the people, into surrendering more of your wealth to prop up this Ponzi scheme, central bank to go on funding the wars, that's all it is. It's a cash grab. That's all of it. And frankly, the stock market isn't supposed to be propped up. That's not the way it was supposed to work.
No.
Okay, but the reason they're having to prop it up is in starting all the way back in the Clinton administration with the plunge protection team in order to prevent the market from going down, to make it look attractive to foreign investors. They just kept pushing it up and pushing it up, crushing the short sells and manipulating the market upward, and now it is hideously overvalued, more so than in 1929. And now all these financial institutions that bought these huge blocks of stock, now they've got them. If the market drops, all of these Wall Street firms will be instantly insolvent. And that's why the Federal Reserve is cranking out $85 billion a month in brand new money, and half of that goes right into Wall Street for them to go on buying in more stocks and make the stock market look like it's good.
And the problem with these moves is that corporate revenues cannot possibly keep up with inflation with this quantitative easing, and earnings and estimates and actual growth are plunging.
See, that's another aspect of this shutdown, because supposedly we were ready to get the third quarter earnings reports, and the rumors were they were not going to be very good. But thanks to the shutdown, they're not being made public. And whenever the shutdown ends, by then it's going to be old news.
There is a complete disconnect, because the Standard & Poor's 500 soared 16 year to date. And relative to the, I mean, it's like one piece of data has absolutely no correlation with the other.
It's all being rigged. It's all theater. They're amusing you with a magic show here. I need to move on because we're almost at the end of the show, and I got a couple of things to count. First of all, Fox News just led with a breaking news. There's a new terror warning. They don't actually have a terror suspect. They don't actually have a terrorist under arrest. They don't actually have a threat. But pilots are warning that they think they're seeing terror dry runs. Now, this is something else that we were seeing before 9/11, where supposedly these Middle Eastern people were taking strange, unaccountable trips on airplanes, going around, and nobody could figure out what they were doing when they got to the destination, except they stayed for a day or two and then they came back. It must be a terror dry run. I don't know. Maybe they're going over to a state where they can get drunk and their family doesn't know about it. Who knows what's going on?
Yeah.
But they're hyping terror again, and my concern is that this government, this financial system, and certainly the government of Israel are now in a corner. All of the lies about Saddam and Ahmadinejad and Rouhani and Assad are falling on deaf ears. They know they need to get this war agenda going. They know they need to get to a state of national emergency so they can just sort of say, this is what it all is and you can't ask any questions. And I am very concerned because of all this terror run-up we've been seeing over the last several weeks, drone strikes and all the rest of it, the botched raids over the weekend into Somalia and Libya. And they're pre-selling a new 9/11.
And Mike, aren't there supposed to be some FEMA drills going on the East Coast in the not-too-distant future.
Yeah, very much there's that as well. And so we need to be very much aware. And, folks, when you hear the Big Bang, because let's face it, planes into buildings, passé. Been there, done that, didn't buy the T-shirt.
Right.
So they're going to have to do something even more spectacular to try and scare you back into obedience to this war agenda. And when that Big Bang happens, the logical presumption is, yeah, it's Israel and the U.S. again, because that's what they've always done. But if you are one of those trusting, naive Americans who are going to believe the official story about, oh, the evil Russian, Chinese, Iranian, Syrian, Lebanese, Palestinian, Hezbollah, Hamas terror cartel, a new Big Bang in this country of any kind is going to send the message that the NSA has failed. All this spying on the American people has failed. The Department of Homeland Security has failed. TSA has failed. All the crotch groping failed. FBI failed. CIA failed. You're looking for something to cut to save the U.S. federal government budget? Start with these huge, costly agencies that can't do anything. And that's what the next Big Bang really is going to mean for that tiny segment of the population that believes the official story.
And, I mean, to counter against that, if these guys were all so good, why did the bombings happen at the Boston Marathon?
That's exactly right. Well, in my theory, they were allowed to happen because the U.S. needed a new terror attack to get Americans reminded of the dire threat that waits out there if we don't go out and conquer the world.
And these kids had been radicalized years before, had they not?
I'm not sure how radicalized they were.
Okay.
I mean, we know that the photos in the Boston Marathon showed them carrying light gray backpacks. The photos of the exploded bombs showed they were in black backpacks. Obviously, these two guys didn't do it.
No.
We have that horrible atrocity with the FBI down in Florida where they were trying to, coerce this witness into signing a confession linking the Tsarnaevs to a drug murder so they could demonize them and say, don't worry about any other contradictory. See, these were bad people. They were drug crime murderers, and you don't need to look any further. Kid wouldn't sign the confession. They just gunned him down on the spot. And that's betrays the degree of panic we are seeing in the government that we, the American people, have seen the card up the sleeve, the trapdoor that the rabbit comes through. We've lost our suppression of disbelief, suspension of disbelief, and we're looking for more wires and hooks and mirrors and smoke. And, I think we're getting really close to the end. And the danger is cornered animals are the most dangerous. And I just absolutely know that somewhere between here and the government finally saying, okay, we quit, you can have your country back, they're going to try a new false flag. Remember, we had Rumsfeld on audio tape just a few years ago saying how great it would be if there was a new 9/11 terror attack to remind Americans that they're supposed to be afraid of all the evil Muslims out there. They're planning these things. Operation Northwood. They have lived and survived by lies and fraud and deception so long, they don't know any other way to work. They're all lawyers and politicians. They don't actually know how to make a nation work. They just know how to stand up and take credit for the good things and blame somebody else for the bad things here. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to get back to the multiple protests that are taking place across the country this weekend. We have the truckers' ride for the Constitution into Washington, D.C. and Phoenix and other state capitals. We have the Million Veteran March going into Washington, D.C. over the atrocious treatment of the war memorials and the veterans who are trying to see them. We have that protest tomorrow, global protest against Monsanto and GMOs. It is vitally important that you get out there to any of these demonstrations and be seen, because this is our opportunity to shout to the rest of the world, we the people of the United States of America are not a party to the crimes of this government and this financial system. We reject it. We do not see this government as legitimate. We do not accept responsibility for their actions. We are opposed to it. We know they are lying to sell all these wars to the rest of the world, and it must come to an end, because the entire world is at risk if this thing gets going out of control here. So find a protest, join in, get on social media, get the word out, get out on your street with a sign saying, I support the truckers' ride for the Constitution, or I support the veterans, or I'm opposed to Monsanto GMOs, but get out there and get visible. The more people who are out there protesting, the more the rest of America is going to say, now is the time to get out there and protest. It is that important.
Absolutely.
All righty, so we got about a minute left here, and it's time for Claire and I to go on out as we normally do this time every week and head on over and try and get some food for the hungry people on this island. And the depressing thing is the crowds are getting larger and they're getting younger.
Yeah.
Of course, as we know, food stamp money has been cut. Other assistance programs have been cut. It's a major crisis. But by golly, the wars go on, the NSA goes on, Wall Street goes on, Israel goes on, but you, the American people, give us your money and don't expect anything back.
Right.
We will be back on Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, make good choices, and aloha, America.